In this video, I'm talking all about the misconceptions of shooting on Red. So let's get into it. So I recently decided to make a big investment into my business and upgrade to a Red digital cinema camera. And the reason why is because I was looking to one-up my video production. I was looking to improve the quality of my work and have more flexibility in my workflow. Now, this decision did not come lightly. You don't invest this much money into a camera system that you know nothing about. So I've spent the past year, in fact, I've spent years researching Red cameras and trying to understand what makes them so great and why people use them. And it's funny because after doing all of my research, I kept hearing the same things over and over and over again. But these are all misconceptions. I feel like these rumors have come from people that either have little experience with Red or have never used Red, because I personally find there are a few misconceptions about shooting on Red that are just not true. So I'm going to talk all about that in today's video. So the first misconception is Red can save the day. It doesn't matter if you have a bad script, if you have bad actors, you have bad lighting, you have poor camera crew. If you're shooting on Red, your film would be amazing. That's not true. Now, this camera is incredible, and don't get me wrong, it can produce an incredible image, but it's not a band-aid. If you have bad lighting, bad camera crew, bad actors, just because you're shooting in 5K on a Red camera doesn't mean your film's going to be any good. You still have to make sure that you get everything else perfect, and that way everything else is really going to shine under the light of a beautiful looking video. So just because you're shooting on Red doesn't guarantee you that you're going to have a great looking video. Now, the second thing that I've heard about Red, and the one thing that has really made me scared to make the leap into Red, is the file sizes are out of this world. Now, don't get me wrong, file sizes on this camera are pretty large, especially if you've come from the DSLR sort of cameras. But if you've come from something like a Sony FS7, for example, or a Canon C300, then there's not really much of an increase. So yes, if you're shooting on a Canon 1100D or Canon 400D, for example, you might get half an hour of video and it might come to something like 5 gigabytes. Of course, if you're making that comparison, then the jump is huge. But when I'm shooting on my Sony FS7, I can get through 250 gigabytes shooting 4K in 2 hours. Now, I did a music video shoot very recently and I shot the whole music video in 5K. And I was able to get around 2.5 hours of footage, and I only used about 450 gigabytes on my card. Now, of course, that again sounds like quite a lot, but when you consider that everything was shot in Red RAW, that's not actually a lot when you think about it. And of course, the great thing is with Red is you've got the option to have different compression ratios. So if you have a compression ratio of 2:1, then your video file is going to be much larger than if you have a compression ratio of 20:1. And realistically, when you're posting a video to YouTube, that's going to severely compress your video anyway. The difference between 2:1 and 20:1 isn't really that much. So that basically means you can shoot for hours and hours and hours on this camera and not burn a massive hole on your hard drive. So yes, if you're not careful, Red can eat up a lot of storage, but if you're using the correct compression ratios and you're intelligent about what settings that you're using, then you can definitely get a whole day of filming done for only 200 to 300 gigabytes. Now, the third misconception that I've heard is you can control everything in the camera through Red RAW. And that is incorrect. If you're a photographer, then you know the difference between JPEG and RAW. Yes, you can control some settings, but not all of your settings. And that's the same thing here. So when you're shooting in Red's R3D RAW files, you've basically got the option to adjust your white balance and your ISO in post. But your shutter speed and your aperture and your frame rate, that's all controlled in the camera. Once you've shot in a 1/100 shutter speed and you've been shooting at 50 frames per second, you can't fix that in the edit. Red RAW is great, but it's not a miracle worker. So like with any other shoot, if you're shooting on Red, you want to think ahead about what you're trying to capture. If you need slow-mo, then you want to shoot in a higher frame rate. If you don't need slow-mo, shoot in a lower frame rate, because once you've made these decisions on the day, you can't change them in the edit thanks to the RAW. RAW only affects your ISO and your white balance. And then the fourth misconception that I've heard so many times when it comes to Red is you can't edit Red footage on a laptop. Now, don't get me wrong, this thing can destroy your computer if you're shooting in the wrong settings. If you've got a compression ratio of 2:1, you're shooting in 5K, and you've got a high frame rate, then yes, of course, your computer might struggle to keep up. But if you're shooting at a higher compression ratio of, let's say, 15:1, you're in 5K, then your computer's going to get on with it fine. Yes, it might stutter a little bit, but in Premiere, all you have to do is drop the paused and playback quality from full down to quarter, and that should do the trick. But if that still doesn't work and your computer is still struggling, then you've got the option to edit using proxies. Now, I'm going to do a full video all about proxies very soon, but proxies are basically like a smaller video file size. It's like a carbon copy of your footage, but it's much smaller and much easier for your computer to handle. You edit with these lower file versions of your videos, and then you swap them out for the high-res videos later on. And it basically means it's going to streamline your video editing process. You can edit all of your footage smooth in real time. You can even have the quality up to full, and then you just swap these out for the final video files later on. So again, editing using proxies or editing using a reduced playback quality will really enable you to edit RED footage on your laptop. I have a 2017 MacBook Pro, and my laptop doesn't struggle with this camera whatsoever. I don't even have to run it through proxies, and I can just play the footage back at half quality when playing back the video. And there you go. Those are the top 4 misconceptions about shooting on RED that I hear all the time. So if you're planning on buying this camera or renting this camera at some point in your career, but you're doubting yourself because you keep seeing all of these things online, just pay close attention to all 4 of the things that I mentioned in this video, and I promise you it's really going to help to calm the nerves and make you less stressed about shooting on RED. So there you go. I hope this video helped you, and of course I will see you on the next video. See you there.